a bit. The trip we did was in September last year, and this wasn't a tourist holiday or anything. We actually went with Christian Aid. I was with Christian Aid on a visit to Brazil, but that was 15 years ago. So times have changed. This was going to Zambia. And for anybody that doesn't know about Christian Aid, it's a development charity, very similar to Oxfam or Save the Children Fund. There's nothing about it is to do with setting up churches or trying to get people to be Christians or anything like that. It's the development charity, works alongside other development charities in many countries in the world, has been around for 60 years or more. Martyn and I have been supporters for about 30 years, and we saw this trip being advertised at a Christian Aid conference in Nottingham. What you have to do then is put in an application form, which was just like applying for a job. Why do you want to go? What are you going to do with the information afterwards? So what we're doing this morning is very much what we contracted in to do, which was sharing information of what we saw. So I think what we hope to do now is to talk through how what happened when we arrived, the sort of style of the trip, and then there were 4 particular projects we went to in different parts of Zambia. Zambia, I always learned at school, was quite a rich country in African terms because of its mineral wealth. I came back very upset, really, because of history, things that have happened in the past. Zambia doesn't really own its own minerals anymore. Like in a lot of African countries, a lot of corruption, a lot of bad dealings in the past. Colonialism has left its message. Martyn and I always enjoyed trying to get below the surface, so this wasn't a visit to look at scenery and wildlife. This was to look at how people are surviving and living in different areas. So we get into ideas of global interactions and trade, business, how people get money in order to survive.
So just to give an overview of our trip, if you like, there's a country map of Zambia. We came in at Lusaka, landed there by plane, and quite quickly went to the offices there, which we'll talk through in a minute. But then our trip took us further up into the country, where we went to visit some farmers who were growing various crops. And then we went up to the copper belt area, not so much mining copper, but we got involved with some people who were mining silica. And then after that, we've got a women's refuge centre and the work to protect women to talk through. Then we had the final visit down south, which was where we met people who had been displaced through genuine mining activities, coal mining activities. And then right at the end of it, that took us a full week to do. We did go on to Livingstone Falls, Victoria Falls at Livingstone, where we were able to get a little bit of rest and relaxation. Anyway, our intention is to take you through all of these and talk you through a little bit about the life in Zambia. That was the group we travelled with. That was the picture at Heathrow as we set off. I won't waste time by going through and introducing everyone, but the majority were volunteers like ourselves, and we were accompanied by 2 to 3 Christian Aid staff as well. So that was the party which set off. That was where we landed. Lusaka Airport's a little bit different to the one at Heathrow, but that's where we landed. And quite quickly, we then went off to meet the Christian Aid partners in Zambia. Christian Aid works through local partners. Organisationally in Zambia, it works through a joint churches partnership, which is an alignment with Christian Aid, Norwegian Church Aid, and Danish Church Aid, Dan Church Aid. So the first thing we did was go to their offices, have a briefing, be told what to expect, and a little bit about how we're to conduct ourselves. So that was very much the first introduction. As we've said, there's a map of where we're travelling. Our journeying took us through the middle there. With the roads going off and bits and pieces, we think we drove the equivalent of going between Plymouth and Aberdeen and back again. Now, that was quite an experience. We were accompanied all the time with Harriet and Bella from the Joint Churches Partnership. That they were great guides. Coming with us was Brandrick, the guy in the yellow shirt there who drove the JCP vehicle, and we had a guy called Joseph who drove us around in a minibus and did a magnificent job. That's the group, and we met up with the people together in JCP, and we had quite a good discussion with them. Probably not time for it today, but we could talk through that at any time. On the road, we had a variety of roads, some of which were on the major north-south road, which was the Copperbelt Road. It was interesting in its own right and had these large vehicles going up and down. Other times we were on much more rural type roads, dust tracks, and you would go 20 or 30 kilometers on these to get to some places. So we certainly had a good variety as we traveled around. As we went, you would see various things being sold alongside the road. It was in tomato season, so everyone was trying to sell tomatoes. We hardly saw any being bought, but everyone was trying to sell them. And the sacks on the left-hand side, we did see these being bought and shipped around. They're charcoal. They're what people use for their cooking stoves and the like. So they buy charcoal in those bags and take them home and cook. The actual shopping side on the major streets, you know, would be a little bit, you know, more of the shops we'd see. Also, if you went into the big towns, you did end up seeing the supermarkets like we'll have at home, but they were quite a rare event and not what our visit was on about. And mostly our visit went swimmingly, but we did have one problem with the trailer carrying our bags, which managed to part company with the minibus at one point. So we had to dump the trailer. Unfortunately, there was space to take our bags in the accompanying vehicle. That's just a quick overview. We'll now start to take you through one of the projects.
This project was the one that was to do with the silica mining. I didn't know anything about silica, but apparently it's located in the ground next to where there's copper, and copper mining and Zambia go together. The guy in the black t-shirt talking to Martyn was the guy in charge of this project. He was an advocate, an extremely well-spoken man, and we all said we'd like to take him home to get some things going in this country. But he was amazing in his ability to ask the right questions in the right places and to keep people enthused and supported. Every trip, the 4 trips we did, we all started like this in a briefing session on the ground, very near to the project. So this is Martyn sitting with some of his colleagues and the group all trying to comprehend what they were talking about. We had a briefing before we left in Leeds, which helped in that. So this basically was a support of local people, about 480 of them, who are miners, but not miners going underground, they're mining on the surface. This was part of the office with lots of posters up, but this is what they called mining. This lady was a older than me, but she was mining in this way for 6 or 8 hours a day. No sanitation, no water, just in the dust, using tools that we would have much better in our garden shed. They're looking for little bits of stone, and when they find one bit, then they throw it along the side in order for it to be sieved and grounded the best they can to make it into smaller pieces. The bottom picture there is me having a go. Always like to have a go at these things, and I wouldn't fancy doing that for 8 hours a day. What the project that is supported by JCP, and JCP is supported by Christian Aid, what they're trying to do are various things. The first thing that they've established is the miners now, about 480 of them, have the right to the land. We came across this lots of times. Who owns the land? Is it the tribal groups that have owned it for generations, or other people? Other people often being Chinese. In this situation, they've now got the legal right to the ground, the land. They also have legal documents saying that they are allowed to mine. So that's the two most basic things that the project has succeeded in doing. Lots of talk. The way that these projects work is very much from the ground up, listening to people that are on the ground. What are their fears? What are their hopes? What would they like to improve their situation? One of the things, obviously, is they want more money for the silica that they obtain. And one of the ways of doing this, the project has managed to get them to work as a group, as a cooperative, so that they can support each other. So they now no longer have to sell to the middlemen that sell on to the companies. They sell direct to the companies because they're much stronger working together. The terrain they worked in, as you can see, was very rough, and their equipment was very rough. A lot of them didn't have any shoes. One of the things the project did was to provide protective gloves and face masks, and we saw those being worn. They were obviously very appreciated. They want to provide some better footwear, but that's still something to come. Whole families were involved. Some of the men had been working underground in the local copper mines, but for whatever reason had been laid off. The women, there were more women on this silica project than there were men. The women had never done anything like this before. This was different from, you know, cooking at home or looking after children. The children came too. So what has happened with the support? What has happened with the support? They've got the legal rights to the land. They've got the legal right to mine.
The session is about to end.
Okay. Well, this was the first project, but we will be going to see 3 others. Okay, I'm sorry about the delay in starting. It's all been a bit of a rush.
No, it wasn't your fault, I'm sure. And we'll see you all at 11:10. Thank you so much.
The next project we went to was actually about making agriculture a business. Now, the project centre was actually around a former mission hospital, which was still a hospital, but was some 20 or 30 kilometres off the beaten track. It was very much a community centre as well as a hospital. So the usual thing, we gathered around and had a meeting first of all to learn what the project was about. Then we walked around the back towards where there was a pilot area and a field, and on the way we passed the relatives of those people who are actually in the hospital. And as happens in many countries, it's the people, visitors who come and make the food. And the sema is the staple diet in Zambia and that part of the world. And that was what was being made as we walked past. The reason we were walking past was to get to a pilot field. And the intention is to grow more crops. And what they've lined up is communities into 4 patches, and each of them are going to have a quarter of this pilot plot, which is in the process of developing, so they could all learn off one another. Now, one of the key things in Zambia is you grow crops during or effectively the rainy season. You plant them in the late autumn, they get wet, and you harvest them in the early spring. The idea of the pilot is to actually bring irrigation into the project so they can actually grow more crops at different seasons. And you'll see there's the top of a borehole there waiting to form part of this project. We then travelled away from there and actually made our way to the village and the Grace group at Shihimo. Now, I think a lot of our microphone problems came from trying to get a video to work showing their welcome to us, because they gave us a rapturous welcome as we actually sort of got off our minibus and greeted us, and it was a real joy. And having been welcomed, we then went into their community facility, be it a shelter, we would call it a village hall perhaps, but it didn't have any walls. But it gave us an opportunity to go inside and actually meet with the villagers and be told of their experiences. They each in turn, or many of them in turn, got us and talked to us about the project, the way they've been supported through the Christian Aid partner, and more importantly, the credit union scheme, which they'd started off and actually sort of got already underway. In some ways, this village was a little bit ahead of the project because they had their credit union established, but part of the credit union gave them the ability to actually fund some of the irrigation equipment they would actually need. And it was most telling, one of the people stood up and actually said to us, he didn't believe in this project when it started, but his wife did, and she was right and he was wrong. So that gave us a flavour of that village. As we walked back to the minibus, we could see some of the other scenes in the village, some of the households there, the open washing facility, and there was a modicum of modernity with the solar panel, probably just powering a light in that particular house. But that gave us a flavour there. And then we went on to see the field where they were actually growing kale out of season. Their irrigation was a bit cruder than I think the project intends to get there, but it was a good start, and they were very buoyant in the fact that they were actually able to grow additional crops, which they weren't able to do beforehand. So just to wrap up that one, I know I've had to rush through it. Key element was the credit union, working together as a cooperative, bringing new approaches to farming, particularly around the use of irrigation, and them being a model for other villages. And they certainly demonstrated a lot of hope and optimism to us. Anne will now take you through the next project. We thought the break was there. These are just a few passing scenes as we go through some of the shots we saw and collected.
This next village, well, this actually was more in the urban areas, but this project was based on gender-based violence. And in many ways, if you think of women's refuges in this country, this was a little bit like that. But in Zambia, it's only very recently been passed legally as a statute by government to make gender-based violence a criminal offence. That's very recent. The government, though, is making small steps, and the school syllabus is now being changed, and it now includes government-based violence and also HIV. There's been a radio program. This particular project we went to see has managed to put together a program that's been put on national radio, One of the guys we were with, Bella, was their communications guy who had done all the work on that. I think we need him here today. The promotion of human rights, particularly women's rights, has become quite prominent in some areas in universities and high schools. One-stop centres, this was called a one-stop centre, so that women could go to one place. This was a building on the side of a hospital, but one place to access help from the police, social workers, legal help and health care. Some of the women we met had walked 5 or 6 miles to the project base, and they'd walk back again, some of them carrying their little children on their back and what have you. And if nothing else, it was somewhere for people to go who needed someone to listen, who had been in similar situations. The guy standing up at the back in the black jacket, he was their lawyer. He called himself paralegal, so I don't think he was fully qualified, but he certainly took cases to court, partly, as in this country, to try and track down husbands in order for them to pay maintenance money to provide care for the children. They'd got various statistics of successes, but an awful lot which was still in the pipeline. As I said, they're getting more and more publicity and awareness in Zambia as a whole. This is one of the posters they use. Big group of us there. And I really like this because it's quite a mixture. You don't know who are the ladies who have been suffering abuse and who are staff. Child marriages, somebody has asked about child marriages. We didn't hear a lot about child marriages at all. What we did hear about, though, was still female mutilation. That's obviously an issue that, again, it's a cultural change in patterns, but that is seen as gender violence. Marty's just found a bit of paper for me. And I say we didn't hear much about it, but he's obviously got some stats here. We've got 42% of girls are married by their 18th birthday. I mean, that would be the same all over Africa. It's not, and many countries. One of Bella's videos he'd made for communication and advocacy and trying to get the matter in public debate. One that we showed, it was quite short, but I was very moved by it. It was a young girl, just 3, something like that, who was being abused by her grandfather. It was pretty horrific. One thing we found difficult here was their different way of working, in that a lot of the women were very seemingly happy to tell us our stories. We'd just walked in through the door and there were them telling us very personal individual situations. We have here put up the things that have been achieved, a place for people to go, one place, you're not going one way and somewhere else to seek legal help or financial help or to get police involved. There was also an emergency refuge. As I say, very similar to in this country. The building on the top left-hand corner was the refuge. Initially, they said only a couple of us would go in there because obviously these are highly traumatized ladies. But we all went in the end, very briefly. There were no women present when we went in, or not that we saw, but we did see a handful of children around a table with toys and trying to do a bit of schoolwork. There was some hope and optimism here, but not like in the project where Martyn talked about before in the agricultural area. They were really on a high and doing very well, and I think they knew it. The ladies here, although they've got somewhere to go, they really, very, very difficult situation. What they needed, the same the world over, was the ability for women in their own right to be able to have an ability to earn some money, to have a job, so that they didn't have to go back to their man in order to have some food on the table. So that was an interesting meeting with the ladies there. Huge issues that are, I'm afraid to say, prevalent all around the world, but perhaps more so in a very poor society where there's little support. This was our third visit, and these was another very desperate situation. All these people in this shot, except for those with white faces, all these people had been displaced from their home. They didn't even have a building in order for us to have our briefing session. We sat outside. What had happened, they used to live as a community, a village, about 5 miles away, and they lived on land that has been disputed now as to whether it's tribal land ownership or owned by the coal mining company. And the locals have lost out, and the coal miners continue coal mining, which has caused the village area to subside, and the houses are actually falling down. And the local people, against their wishes, have physically been moved. This is one of the coal lorries coming in. And this, you can see what happened to the mud brick houses. Still piles of coal on the surface there, and the area, the sign on the tree, which is danger, no entry, caving area. Literally, the ground was falling away. So people needed to be moved, but they've lost their job and they've lost their home. You say, would they have been compensated in any way? This tent in this picture was the compensation, but you only got a tent for 3 weeks. They had basic monetary compensation, but wouldn't last for more than a few days. The picture on the bottom left of the picture is the entry to the coal mine that still goes on. It's a Chinese held coal mine, and the Christian Aid partner here has been working for a few years. There've been documentaries on the television. There's been the Prime Minister of the country has actually visited the area, gained some publicity, lots of local meetings. We were told one ended with gunfire. Very hard for local people to stand up when others turn up with guns. This is all that's left on the right-hand side of a village community that was. The village is people that we saw, the poorest we went to visit. They'd got no areas of land for growing crops. They'd got virtually nothing to live in. They were living under the trees, really. I mean, a few quickly made houses. Here they are on the left-hand side, taking some of the bricks they used to have in a house, and they would move those 5 or 6 miles to try and build a new one. But very desperate. But again, Christian Aid, through the work of JCP, has tried to listen to people's concerns. Public meetings have been organised. They've had visits from dignitaries, publicity in the press and the television. Compensation claims on behalf of the local villagers have been made. I've put there in writing they're ongoing. The positive on this project, if anything, was that JCP, Joint Church Partnership, have had the experience, the learning of what's happened here, so that in other areas where mining displacement, people being moved on, they might have a better idea of what to do and how to get some sort of more positive support. What is the government doing about the situation? Well, as I said, the Prime Minister has turned up, but like in a lot of countries, poor countries, there's a lot of backhanded payments being made. The Chinese coal mining company has lots of money, lots of clout, so not an awful lot, I think, from the government point of view.
Just, we're not quite ahead of time, but we have got a little bit more time to talk through. We've talked about JCP, which is the vehicle Christian Aid works with as the partner in Zambia. The projects we've just quickly gone through, they will have individual partners who take forward those works. So JCP will set a number of objectives for what they want to achieve throughout Zambia. And these individual project providers, partners, will actually come to them and actually bid for funding. And it was quite illuminating to have that dimension sort of talked out to us. Part of the issue, and it does affect what Anne's just been talking about, is a lot of the land in Zambia is still tribal, which means that the tribes think they own it, but actually industrial conglomerates can come and take over it with the sanction of the government and displace the people who are actually on it. So that land isn't actually worked through in precisely the same way as we do in our country. So that's very much a rushed flavour. I'll go back to yeah, go on.
One of the things that wasn't on our agenda in any way at all was climate change. And yet when we were driving around, that seemed to be the thing that was most relevant. Absolutely everywhere was scorched earth, sand, dust. We saw virtually nothing in the way of greenery, trees or bushes or plants, except for the project we went to see with the irrigation scheme. The rest was dry and parched. Zambia had not had its winter rains the previous year. They'd had nothing during the year, and it was very, very, very dry. When we got home, we saw that there was national outcry about the poverty caused by the drought. It obviously was an excessive dry season, and that had got international recognition. Fortunately, this last season, the rains did come. So in that sense, they'll be a bit better this year. But if anybody wanted to talk about climate change and dry, parched earth, we certainly saw plenty.
And the other thing, just to give an economic feel for the country, it produces enough electricity for everyone in Zambia to have a power supply. They choose to sell 25% of it abroad, which means that everyone has to enjoy, if you haven't got your own generator, a disrupted power supply. So that sort of shows some of the economic plight and why Christian Aid is actually sort of working there. But towards the end of our trip, we actually went on and did a little bit more touristy. It was all fitted into a day. This was down at Livingstone by Victoria Falls on the south there. We stayed in 40 Towers Hotel. I don't think Basil had ever been there, but it was a bit quirky, but quirky in a slightly different way. With its pools and with the sorts of bits and pieces which are invariably for sale there. Now, as Anne said, it was the dry season, and this is Victoria Falls in the dry season. In the wet season, all the way along on the right-hand side of that picture will be covered with water, but we had it in glorious sunshine, and we were able to walk across the top of that bit between the various crevices and bits and pieces where the actual river usually comes across. So that was that bit. And then there's a little bit more for the falls itself. And then the group, as we were down at the lower level of the fall, and again you can see how dry it is there. That's the bridge which takes you into Zimbabwe, and there's a railway line across that as well. The monkeys were about, they were a bit cheeky, they'll nick any bottle of pop you left lying around, so that was there. But as you say, we had Victoria Falls very much in the dry season. Our daughters visited more recently, and this was the pictures they sent back to us, which shows that they weren't really able to take the pictures in the nice sunshine, which we did, but they certainly saw a lot of water, even most of it landed on top of them at that time. And then, having visited the falls, there is a national park near there.
Again, very, very dry. I've never been in a national park where people, the rangers, were actually intervening with nature. There was water being squirted about and irrigation for some water so that the animals didn't starve or they didn't die from thirst. Sowed land. This was a special part of the park where we picked up an armed ranger, and that picture is not blown up. We literally were distance across a room to those animals, but they were under 24-hour guard, armed guard, because local people are so poor and the price of ivory is so lucrative that the animals are still being poached. So this was 24-hour security for each individual rhino. In the dusty surrounds countryside, there was no wildlife that we saw. No deer, no squirrels, no rabbits. We were told that all has been killed for food for people. I can't imagine that 100% has, but we certainly never saw anything. This is the River Zambezi. This was taken from a picnic area in the national park. You might be able to work out which are rocks and which are hippo heads. We sat there a long time watching. It was nice to have a day at the end of the trip, which was tourist day, because having visited 4 projects, we found ourselves in some ways somewhat depressed. In other ways, we had met a few people who were superb, absolutely amazing advocates who would speak up and make comments, make films in order to highlight the situation of certain groups in the community to try and bring about justice. Martyn and I, we always like to try and get underneath the surface when we do visits and to try and understand the culture and how village communities tick. Some things are very good, others are not so.
I'm conscious we're moving towards our last 5 minutes, but we have geared it this way. I know we've rushed through this particular half, so do put any questions you want us to answer on the chat thing now, because we would like to take that. We know we've rushed through today. If anyone wants to be in touch with us to talk about any questions or any more details, I'm sure Trish will pass our contact details on. And so we've done this on a Christian Aid footing. I mean, there's lots more about Christian Aid and the challenges the whole world is facing with COVID virus at the moment. And there's giving you can do through that, or for Christian Aid Week, which is coming up, we have set a page for Loughborough. But we'd very much like to use the last few minutes to answer the questions you've got.
whilst you think what with Martyn's just coming a quick read, but one last thing I'll talk about would be the COVID-19 situation. In this country, we're all told to be washing our hands, keeping our distance, what have you. In the communities we went to visit, that would have been virtually impossible. You've got, you know, families of 10 all living in a very simple mud hut. The only option is you're either inside or outside. There's no separate rooms and certainly no taps in order to wash your hands. The amount of people, the percentage of people that have taps in their hands is very, very limited. What we saw, if villages were lucky, would be a communal pump. But then if you think of 50 or 100 people all using the same pump with its metal handle, the fear of passing on germs is immense.
There's a question about healthcare. Fortunately, the whole group stayed healthy while we were away, so we never had to experience healthcare. Clearly, the agricultural project was based around a hospital, and that seemed to be functioning. Equally, the Women's Refuge was in a hospital, but I had occasion to go to the toilet there and I wasn't impressed. So what the overall life of the, you know, in terms of, so there are facilities, they're few and far between, and they certainly won't have the ventilators we've got there.
When we were at the village that had been moved from where it was originally, I put a photo up of a very large lady on a motorbike. She was the actual advocate who had got the JCP Christian Aid involved in that community. She has worked for all her life basically as the village health visitor. I mean, she knew the place inside out, and as we often say, the locals in some ways know their own ways out. It's just needing a hand to be able to do that.
About the family and education, the whole family, but how do you educate it for the people of the Silicon Project?
Yeah, the whole idea of children going to school, it might, I've got a feeling that education, basic primary education is free, but at the same time you've got to get your child there, and it could be many miles away, your local school. There's very little checks on the school, so you might have an abusive teacher, or certainly somebody who doesn't necessarily get the most out from the children, and you might find that parents are better teachers than the teachers themselves. I mean, that's only in certain situations. In other situations, villages would have very good schools. So it depends very much. Potluck, where you're born?
I mean, the Silicon Minings was very much a family affair. It was a picture there of an aunt and a niece, if you like. So I think in some ways the extended family comes into play in a way we perhaps don't see as to how things go.
Some of the men in the Silica project, as I said, had worked down underground in the copper mines, but the copper mines, you're out of work, you're pensioned off at 55 years old. So some of them were 55 plus, like the granddads. But we were staggered at the ages of some of the people who were still doing that very physical work. One lady we met was 70, 75, and she was still working 6 to 8 hours, back-baking work, no shoes on her feet.
Anyway, I think this session is about to come to a close. Our apologies because of technical glitches, some of them have been ours, but we hope that you've got an appreciation of what we saw in Zambia, a little bit off the beaten track, and how many Zambians actually live. As I say, if any questions come back to us afterwards, or any queries, or people want more information, just go through, and I'm sure those messages will get to us. But it's been wonderful having a go speaking to you.
One last little bit from me. I'm always, when travels, I'm sure it's the same for everybody, I do like a flush toilet. All 4 communities we went to, I don't think we found one.
Thank you very much, Martyn
Yes.
and Anne. Thank you so much. And thanks for sharing that very special experience with us. Just on the flush toilet, I know I traveled to India many years ago, and I always preferred a really good latrine that was well looked after, because you know, flush toilets require so much water, don't they? And our daughter in New Zealand, I don't think she's watching today, but you know, they've got a composting toilet, and it's actually crazy. A flush toilet uses so much water, and we should all perhaps be looking into having composting toilets. Anyway,
when I say no toilets, I just no idea of going to the toilet in the sense of you know, feces all around. You know, just very little knowledge of hygiene, sanitation.
Yeah, it's unbelievable, isn't it?
Cheerio to everyone, because I think the session's about to wrap up. So thanks.
Yeah. Okay. Anyway, thank you so much.